This is going to be gripping stuff. And Harry, is in the unfortunate position that he's not the claimant, he's the defendant. So he's got no choice but to defend it. He chose to bring all his other battles. Some went well for him, others, including spectacularly the latest, were disasters. She can call the tune now and decide when to pull the plug and what she might accept by. I bet they're desperate to settle this. I think he may have met his match.
Hi, all. Welcome to Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. Joining us today is Jonathan Goldberg KC, one of the UK's most highly regarded criminal defense attorneys and co-host of the I Rest My Case podcast, which is available now wherever you listen to podcasts. Jonathan, welcome. Prince Harry's days in court, which might surprise some people, might not be over because the spare is facing a defamation lawsuit from Sentebale, the African youth charity he helped establish nearly 2 decades ago, following an increasingly bitter leadership battle that ultimately ended with Harry walking away from the organization in 2025. And this story was buried back in March because then something else severe happened. And you know how the news cycle works. We jump on to the next thing. Now, when Harry quit his role as patron of Sentebale, he and the co-founder, Prince Siso, stated that they resigned with heavy hearts, were in shock, and felt the relationship with board chair Dr. Sophie Shandaka had broken down beyond repair. Then little leaks to American news outlets started to pop up that were even more scathing towards Shandaka, shielded by the veil of anonymous sources. Jonathan, for our American audience, can you walk us through what happens next? Sentebale has filed this claim in the High Court. What are the stages between filing a defamation lawsuit and actually getting into a courtroom?
Well, Kinsey, the law of defamation in England is incredibly technical, and you really could spend a professional lifetime studying it, and you wouldn't know it that well even then.
Yeah.
But
Is it different than in the United States at all?
Oh, very much so, because the First Amendment protects pretty much any speech at all in America, and it's very hard to bring it, not impossible, but very hard to successfully bring a defamation case, which is why it's a tremendous industry in British law and not really in America. So essentially, what happens once you've issued a claim, as the charity has, for defamation, is there's pleadings on both sides, and those have not been made public. So we don't actually know the detail of what it is the charity is claiming Harry and another guy called Mark Dyer, who's his pal and sidekick and mentor, former army officer and equerry to King Charles at one time, an older man. And we don't actually know what the charity claims they've done. We simply know that Sophie Chandauqua claims that they've organized a tremendous media campaign against her and against the charity. So there'll be pleadings. Then after that, there will almost certainly be hearings at which, by the way, it's judge only. There's no jury in England. So there will be hearings at which the judge has to determine preliminary points of law, such as whether the words or used or written, whether they were in fact defamatory, which is a technical question of law. And then the judge has to determine as a preliminary issue whether they cause serious damage or not to the reputation of the charity and or of the good doctor. Because without that, you can't bring a defamation case in England. And then finally, if those hoops are gone through, there will be the trial. And that's when it will really get interesting, of course.
I mean, we, to your point, don't know exactly what their proof is or what they are insisting was said that led to this. But if you read Tom Bower's betrayal, he does have a source close to Sentebale that says that Harry's brand and that Harry's just toxic activity over the last 6 years negatively affected their ability to fundraise in general. Could that be presented at trial, or does it need to be Sophie Shendako was bullied online to the point of having to shut down her accounts and she saw a doctor? I mean, could it be just analytical proof that people stopped contributing to Prince Harry because of his behavior at a certain point?
Very much so, if that is the case, and she claims it is, because actually this lady is very media savvy. I'm inclined to think that Harry has really met his match in her, and I divert myself, but nonetheless, there are certain similarities between her and Meghan. They're both sort of girls from poor homes who've pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. This lady, is very well qualified. She's a lawyer. She has had very important positions with banks and with financial institutions before she came to join the charity. And she's a very tough cookie and very clever. Anyway, she's given a long interview to Sky News, and she's given all sorts of leaks to other people, including the BBC. And what she has said on the record, and I'm just looking at my note of it, but she has actually said that she first felt tension between Harry and herself about a year ago. That's a year before he resigned in March 2025. And she claims that the Duke's team asked her to defend his wife, Meghan, from negative publicity. And she says that she said, no, we're not setting a precedent by which we become an extension of the Sussex PR machine. So that's pretty hot, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And she says that the number one risk for this organization, meaning Sentebale, was the toxicity of its lead patron's brand. So obviously all that's going to come out at trial. This is going to be gripping stuff. And Harry, is in the unfortunate position that he's not the claimant, he's the defendant. So he's got no choice but to defend it. He chose to bring all his other battles. Some went well for him. Others, including spectacularly the latest, were disasters. But she can call the tune now and decide when to pull the plug and what she might accept by. I bet they're desperate to settle this,
Oh, yeah.
I bet they're desperate. But of course, she's in a position perhaps to say, no, I'm going ahead to trial. Let the public see what's gone on here. So it's really fascinating. And I think he may have met his match.
Well, the idea that Harry orchestrated an online attack is something that we've seen Blake Lively accuse during the Blake Lively case, because it never went to court. Both parties accused the other of conducting this online smear campaign, which I think is something newer that we're seeing in the court system. Could disclosure be the most uncomfortable part of this case for Harry? Could Sentebale potentially obtain emails, text messages, WhatsApps, or communication with journalists to establish whether there really was a coordinated campaign?
Absolutely. Disclosure in an English civil case is now sort of the nuclear weapon, and both sides use it to the full. And they demand an absolute raft, an absolute catalogue, all your emails, all what's on your computers, what you've written to every possible person that you might have contacted about the subject matter of the case. And certainly journalists, the only privilege you have is not to reveal what passed between you and your lawyers. That's called legal professional privilege, which is absolute and sacrosanct. But for the rest of it, absolutely anything he's written to the world or has to be disclosed. And if the other side think you're hiding stuff, then they go to the court for an order specifying what you've got to disclose. It's a very time-consuming and thorough process, and it's a tremendous weapon because it reveals all sorts of stuff that the other side don't want to disclose. And of course, Harry has used it in his interests and to his advantage in all his litigation hitherto. But how shall I put it? The birds may be coming home to roost now.
That's a very good way to put it. Does this happen on the other side too? I mean, would it conflict with Dr. Sophie Shandaka's case at all, or does it not matter if through their discovery they see that she might have collaborated with Tom Bauer on betrayal, where we do get so many details about Harry's fallout with Sentebale? Does that matter here, or does that not take away from her claims ultimately that Harry has pursued or has been so vindictive in what he's done that he's tarnished the brand and her brand?
Well, of course, she's going to be cross-examined on whether she leaked to Tom Bauer. And if she's got any sense, she'll say, absolutely, I did. And it was
Well,
in
if it's
self-defense.
her, we don't know if it's her, but he had a really good source. If you've read the book is like you feel like you are in the room with him.
I confess I haven't read that book by Tom. I've read others with great joy. Um, but if she did leak to the press, her best tactic is to say, absolutely, I did. And it was in self-defense, and I'd do it again and explain why.
Yeah.
And perhaps say because he was doing it and Meghan was doing it and the whole PR machine was doing it ahead of me. And the chances are they were, let's face it. So I don't think it'll be a terrible blow, even if that comes out. The only terrible blow, and people are often very stupid in court, will be if she denies it and then it can be proved by her emails or letters or whatever it might be. That would be a terrible blow. If she's found to be a liar, then anyone found to be a liar in court, the
Harry,
case is over.
Harry in the Daily Mail case, Harry. But
Yes.
you've seen Dr. Sophie Shindaka in the interviews. What do you make of her character? She doesn't strike me as somebody that would be willing to lie on the stand, just based on what I've observed of her. I feel like she has a lot of moral courage and is a very strong individual.
Well, I personally am very impressed by what I've seen. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I mean, her background is very impressive. She's come from nothing, achieved a wonderful education in Canada and then in Britain. She's been honored in Britain. She's received what's called the MBE, which is a member of the British Empire, it stands for. And it's one of the many we have the honors system in Britain that you don't have in America. So we have lords and knights and all sorts of other lesser ranks. And here she is. It's not the highest rank, but it's not by any means negligible. I'd like to be an MBE.
Yeah.
So she's been honored. She's had tremendously important positions in different financial institutions. I mean, she's a very smart cookie. There's no question about it. And of course, she's blown the whistle once before on Harry. She took the, how shall I put it, unorthodox but very clever step of reporting the charity to the Charity Commission, which is the British regulator of charities. It's actually fairly toothless, but that's another discussion. So she reported the charity for bullying and harassment and something called misogynoir, which I had to look out what it was. But it's when a black woman claims that she's been picked on and bullied because she's a black woman, not just because she's a woman. But she also claimed misogyny, which we're all familiar with, which is when you just pick on a woman as such. Well, the Charity Commission, terribly embarrassed, and they didn't know what hit them. They must have been, it must have been landed, that complaint must have landed on the map with a very heavy thump. But they eventually did a sort of mealy-mouthed report in 2025, and it sort of said everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. And it wasn't finding her a liar, and it wasn't finding Harry a liar, and the sun was shining. And all they basically said was that it's unfortunate that they both brought in publicity that was no good for the charity. Right. So here she is now using the court system and the law of defamation really to make the same points against Harry and no doubt this guy Mark Dyer and no doubt other trustees. And I mean, there's going to be an awful lot of dirty linen washed in public if this gets to trial. And I think Harry will be terrified of this getting to trial. But how he stops it is another matter. I suppose you could make an enormous payment into court And that would have the effect that if she continues, and if at the end of the day, the charity gets awarded lesser damages than how much he's offered by the secret payment into court, then she would have to pay. I say she, I mustn't do. I'm being naughty. It's the charity that are the claimants here. She's the controlling figure, but it's still not her actually claiming. She's claiming on behalf of the charity as the chair of the board. And if they didn't beat the payment in, that would mean they'd have to pay costs. And it's costs in this case that's always in defamation. That's the real battle, because costs can be, let me take as an example one of Harry's cases, I forget which, but there was one of his cases where he won £140,000 in damages from one of the newspaper groups for unlawful information gathering. This was one he won. And yet the costs that the newspaper had to pay, having lost, were £10 million. So that's an illustration of how, and now how he's got the boots on the other foot, because as you know, we're waiting now to hear whether the judge in his latest disaster case will award costs against him and indeed indemnity costs against him, which would be far greater than whatever they're insured for, and therefore hit his own pocket and that of the other 6 claimants. We're waiting to hear. So costs is always the real battle in these vanity projects, because these cases are really just vanity projects, played for the world's media and pretending that you're such a wonderful charitable guy and all this other nonsense that it's really about. It's about PR, perhaps on both sides to some extent, perhaps lesser for her than for him. So what I'm saying is that she'd be very worried about costs if he made a big payment in. But, there's another very interesting point here that's gone under the radar, but then you bring me in to tell you things that others haven't noticed. And this has not been noticed, but she has said on record that the costs of this case are not being borne by the charity.
Oh.
She has not said who is bearing the costs.
Do we think it's King Charles?
Oh, no.
I'm just kidding.
You're kidding, but I'll tell you, and I'm not kidding, making a wild guess, because of course nobody's telling me, and she certainly hasn't said who it is if it's not the charity. Yeah. And bearing in mind the costs in these cases are enormous, I mean, nobody with any sense except somebody with the most enormous pocket or who's being financed behind the scenes would ever bring a defamation case. Can I just divert myself to say many times I've been asked by clients whether they should sue for defamation, and you know what my answer has almost always been? I've said, don't be mad. I've said, today's newspapers are tomorrow's fish and chip papers. Mm-hmm. You know how in Britain fish and chips are wrapped in newspaper traditionally. Yeah. Don't, it's a minefield to bring a defamation case. Now, I'm going to make a wild guess that maybe one of these newspaper groups who want their revenge against Harry.
Wow.
For the circus that he's been playing all these years, maybe they're backing Sentebale.
That would be hilarious.
That would be hilarious, and in which case, expect the sparks to fly for the next many, many months and years.
So, this did kind of fly under the radar in March. And then, like you said, today's newspapers, yes, or tomorrow's fish and chips, we're not hearing much about this at all, especially with Harry's current court case with the Daily Mail and that devastating loss really dominating the headlines. What could be going on behind the scenes? I imagine that, to your point, Harry is trying to settle. But in the meantime, I do think for Shandaka and Sentebale, it's more about brand rehabilitation, and I don't really think it's about money. And so while Harry's trying to settle, can they still be saying, here's our strategy. We want to get his text messages. We need in his email inbox. We want to talk to former publicists and communications people that no longer work with him, because maybe they helped, they helped facilitate this online campaign to shut us down and to intimidate us into Dr. Sophie Shandaka stepping down, which is what I think ultimately he was trying to do, trying to bully her out of her position, in my opinion.
Definitely, and that's what she says. And he didn't succeed. I mean, he's resigned, but she hasn't, is the situation, of course. As I said to you, this is one smart cookie, and I think very street smart. It reminds me in so many ways, ironically, of the Harry-Meghan relationship, where he's obviously a dummy compared to her, who is so street smart. So it's all very ironic. But the fact you have not heard too much in the newspapers until now, I would say don't be lulled into a sense of false security, as it were. I think this is going to burst out any day. I think the fact it's been quiet is just because the pleadings have not yet been made public, but they will be. They will be in due course. They will be published, and you'll see exactly what the allegations are, and that's going to make enormous headlines. You'll see what she claims and what the defense is, what he and Mark Dyer, who say it's all an outrageous publicity stunt. You'll see in their public statement, you'll see in detail what they deny and how. The next stage will be very likely a court hearing before whoever the nominated judge will be. Could be Mr. Justice Nicklin again, which wouldn't be very good news for Harry if it was, but it could be. There's no reason why he couldn't hear one case after the other. Anyway, so there'd very likely be a hearing before whoever the judge is to decide all these preliminary legal issues. Were the words defamatory in their normal and natural meaning? Has serious harm been proved? Which is the threshold for bringing a defamation case. And if they can show that, anyone didn't donate who would have done, then that perhaps they'll be able to show, well, the receipts when Harry was there were £20 million. But now that he did this defamation campaign against us, we're only getting in £10 million, whatever it might be. So that's how they would show that there is serious financial harm. And that would get publicity. And then, of course, if this got to trial, if he didn't make an adequate settlement, and if she insisted on running this, which I think she's going to milk this for all it's worth, as I say.
I would.
Why wouldn't you? So would I. And you know that you've got him on the hook here. You really have got him on the hook and squirming. And, if she takes this to trial, oh boy, are you going to get headlines then? It's going to make the last case look small beer, I would say.
Harry.
So be patient. That's what I'm saying. Be patient. I deduce nothing from the fact that it just hasn't been in the headlines since the headlines about the case being brought a year or so ago.
Well, it's probably Prince Harry's probably grateful for that because I think he was humiliated by the Daily Mail verdict, and he doesn't want to continue to look like a loser, which in the eyes of the world, it sounds like you think that do you think that Dr. Sophie Shandaka has a chance here, or is it just the process of the humiliation of the discovery and finding out who Harry really is through text messages and email might be humiliating enough?
I think the discovery is likely to be incredibly humiliating. Let's just take as an example, if she can gain access to the WhatsApps and emails and texts between Harry and this guy, Mark Dyer. Let's just imagine that. Or between Harry and not his legal advisors, Meghan. He'd be entitled to it, the communications between Harry and Meghan dealing with this issue, with Sentebale. And not just sort of since the case arose, but going back from the very beginning. If Harry is texting Meghan saying what a this Chandauku is, do you know what she's done yesterday, darling? Those messages are all to be revealed, right? So the potential embarrassment of the discovery process is nuclear. It really is. And I would imagine that's why he's going to be making a very big payment into court or offer to settle. But of course, if she's backed by a newspaper group, which is the hunch I have, looking for revenge, They're going to say, what do we care if at the end of the day we're down for 10 million costs? The number of newspapers we'll sell is going to dwarf that.
Ooh, yeah, with the idea headlines every day about different conversations Prince Harry's quietly had where he's in a I mean, we've seen the Nazi costume, we've seen the racist word he used to describe a friend in Afghanistan. We know that Harry is not a very PC individual in general,
He's
and
not righteous. And we've, of course, we've seen the movie Cuddles, um,
oh yeah.
text to Charlotte Griffiths. Absolutely, he lets his guard down in a way that does not befit an heir to the throne, but he does. He's not the brightest at all. So, I'll bet you there's a gold mine in them there documents to be discovered.
Well, where does
Of course,
English
he may, and people do, he may simply delete the lot and say that's his normal policy. Very, very sorry. Or he may just disclose a few innocuous ones. Good morning, Meghan. What time are you taking the kids to school? All that can happen. So wait and see.
is that illegal?
Yes, basically, but it happens.
Oh, where does English law draw the line? Could Harry alternatively argue that some of what he said amounted to honest opinion rather
Yeah,
than statement of fact?
yeah.
And what about public interest? This was a major charity founded by a member of the royal family involving governance, fundraising, and vulnerable young people. Could Harry argue that speaking publicly about what happened inside Sentebale was legitimately in the public interest? I mean, he could have handled this differently. He could have just stepped down, but he did kind of go to war, Jonathan.
You're raising and very sensibly raising what are certain defenses to defamation in English law. So the first and major defense is if you say it's true, that whatever I said was true. She was a lousy chairman. She was
Difficult, I think, is one of the
difficult.
nice
Was
ways that,
impossible to work with.
yeah.
All the staff were leaving. She was bullying. I'm just imagining. I don't know if these will turn out to be what he said about her. I'm just perhaps, but although one can read between the lines of the complaint she brought to the Charity Commission, which rather suggests that this is likely to be the subject matter. Okay, now if Harry can show it's true, complete defense. He hasn't libeled anyone if he can show it's true. And the burden of proof, as I've told you previously, in England, unlike in America, in England, the burden is on the defendants. It's on Harry. So it's assumed to be untrue when she sues him, assumed to be untrue unless he can prove it's true. And he has to prove it on what's called the balance of probabilities. He has to show that it's more likely than not that she is whatever he called her. The second defense is if you make honest comment on a matter that's in the public interest. Plainly, the governance of this charity would be in the public interest for the reasons you've said. But has he made honest comment? Well, that's going to depend on just what he's said. And I'm going to take an example, which will be well known to your listeners. So you remember the public statement that Harry and Lady Doreen Lawrence issued within minutes of the Mr. Justice Nicklin judgment in their disastrous last case against Associated Newspapers, where they lost so heavily. And this was, as you recall, a 436-page judgment that took me days to read. And I'm pretty practiced in reading this stuff.
Right.
And yet, within minutes of the result being known, and before ever they could have begun to read the judgment, long before, they issued a statement saying this is a complete whitewash. The judge has been ridiculously over indulgent to the newspapers, and it's totally unfair. You remember that statement? I don't have the exact words in front of me, but that's what it amounted to, total sour grapes. Now, let me give this example. You can say a judgment is stupid. You can say that it's wrong. You can say that it's unfair. But that's very different from saying the judge took a bribe from Associated Newspapers to give that judgment. So now, with that example in mind, Harry can only say he's given honest comment on a matter of public interest if there's a basis of factual truth in what he's said. So if he's just, maliciously made something up, if it's over the top what he's said about her, whatever it is, when we eventually find out, then that defense won't fly. It won't fly. He's not allowed to have said, oh, and what's more, she was sleeping with the janitor,
Right.
for example, if it's not true.
Yeah.
So again, the burden of proof on him, if this eventually comes to trial, and it may not be easily satisfied, possibly.
I mean, if I were him, I'd be petrified. Realistically, could we see him on the witness stand having to defend some of these emails, or even authorizing whatever this campaign, this digital campaign she claims happened? I mean, and I know what she's talking about because I've seen it too. The Sussex Squad. I don't know if we've ever talked about this. This group of Harry and Meghan's fans that tend to attack anybody that's critical of them online. Can Harry be blamed for that? Or,
no, only if he genuinely has organized it. If they've been on a frolic of their own, and he's nothing to do with it. But it may be, mayn't it? The famous line of Henry II, who shall rid me of this turbulent priest? It may be that Harry has done no more than sort of hint it would be nice if his squad had a go at her. That would suffice if you could prove it. But it may be hard for her to prove that he organized it, as she has said in her public statements so far. So how she'll prove that, I don't know, but it may be she has cards up her sleeve that we don't know about.
Right. I mean, they talk on and on about online bullying and campaign against it, but they never stop their own fan base from attack. I mean, I've talked to security experts that say, the risk to William and Catherine after the Oprah interview increased because Harry and Meghan accused random members vaguely of racism, but said the Queen and the Queen and Prince Philip weren't the racists. Well, now you've got question marks over several other people's heads, but they said, that they might not have been intentionally instigating a threat towards the Prince and Princess of Wales, but actions have consequences, and their actions in doing that interview increased threats to William and Catherine because people are angry over a topic like racism. So it's unfortunate that they can't be held accountable for something like that when they could simply come out and say, we see you online, we appreciate your support, but no threats, no harassment. We want to lead with love. They never do that.
Yeah.
It's like they're just completely content.
The beauty of this case is that, I mean, she decides the pace now. She's in the driving seat, by she, I mean Sophie Chandauqua. And Harry doesn't have the ability just to pull out when it suits him, as he did with some of his newspaper cases, where he either settled or came to an agreement or pulled out in certain cases without taking it to trial. Well, he was then in the driving seat, but now she is. So this must be a very novel and very uncomfortable experience for him. And I think it's only just beginning.
I agree. If a Sentebale succeeds, what remedies are realistically available? Are we talking damages, an injunction, publication of the judgment, legal costs? Would Harry have to say, I was wrong, I apologize? Could we be looking at just a public apology?
Oh, Harry's like the character in that movie Love Story, never say you're sorry.
Exactly.
So don't expect an apology. I don't think that will ever happen, because that sort of totally undermines his own brand and the brand of that terrible wife. But what you would have damages. If the charity wins, they get money compensation, the theory of which is enough money to put them into the same position they would have been in if Harry hadn't defamed them. Those damages could be big in this case, because if they were in a position to prove that, I'm taking a completely imaginary example, that £5 million of donation were withheld because of Harry defaming them. And if they can show that Harry did defame them, and that there's a causal link between the two, then Harry's going to have to pay the £5 million. It's easier said than proven, quite obviously. So it's only money. But you said, would the judgment be published? Always. If a British case goes to trial and concludes with a judgment, always public. Would he be humiliated? Enormously. It has the potential, does this, mark my words, to be far bigger even than the last case that was such a complete publicity disaster for him. This really has the potential to be bigger.
Would the courts put any pressure on either side to settle, both sides to settle? Is there any reason to do that? Or do you, you just said Dr. Sophie Shindaka right now is in control. Could she say, absolutely not, this is too important to the charity, we just are trying to clear our name, similar to Johnny Depp, who I think sued Amber Heard, but didn't want a significant amount of money, was saying, I'm just doing it for my reputation.
Yes. The short answer is the court doesn't get involved. The court does not put pressure on to settle. The court is above the fray. That's the theory. And no judge wants to be seen to be pressuring either side to settle. But of course, public opinion is a pressure, and your own lawyers, if they're any good, are a pressure to settle always. Just as you raised Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, it's interesting, isn't it, to remember that the same judge who just presided over the disaster of Harry's loss to Associated Newspapers, Mr. Justice Nicklin, he was the very judge who in England heard the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case, which went for months, far longer even than Harry's litigation. And he came out with a long, detailed judgment where he found convincingly for Amber Heard and that she had been abused and had been assaulted, and all the nasty things she was saying against Johnny Depp were true. That's what happened in England, and damages were awarded. And then, of course, he brought his case in America, in, I think, the state of Virginia. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it was before a jury. And the jury, on exactly the same evidence, but unaware, because they weren't allowed to know what had happened in England, reversed it completely and found convincingly for Depp and saved his career. Yeah. But it's amusing that in two different jurisdictions, one judge only and one a jury, you had a completely opposite result. And amusing too, that that's the same judge who has really crucified Prince Harry in the latest case.
Yeah, and I still can't believe that he is determining who has to pay for the Daily Mail's attorneys, and Harry would attack him prior to that decision being made. Maybe that's a statement I would have made after the judge determined who has to pay who. Can I ask you last?
Let's just, before you move from that, let's just consider, doesn't that show how trigger happy Harry really is? Of course you're right. Doesn't it show that he really loses it on occasion? But also, I have to say that English judges really are of a very high quality, dare I say, far higher quality by and large than in America at every level. And this judge, and indeed any English High Court judge or above, appeal judge, would be so professional that they would turn a blind eye to what he said about them. They'd really put it out of mind. I know that sounds very hard for any human being to do, but he would, and he will. And he might even bend over backwards to show that he's put it out of mind. The psychology can work that way too.
Yeah, I'm sick of people trying to look like the bigger person when it comes to Prince Harry. That's how I'm justifying Charles meeting with Harry after Harry made that statement attacking the King's Court, which in turn is not only your justice system, which you said is just a stellar justice system in general, but then it's the King's Court. It's your son attacking his father's court. Why are you doing this? I'm assuming to look like the bigger person. Last but not least, from a lawyer's perspective, who potentially has more to fear from disclosure here? The charity attempting to prove Harry orchestrated a campaign, or Harry attempting to prove that his criticism of the charity's leadership was justified?
I would say, without doubt, Harry has far more to lose. And one reason is this. Firstly, because anything that is negative publicity for him, who employs half the world's PR experts to protect him from negative publicity, and he needs to because he seems to want to put his foot in it so often. He's much less sure-footed, I think you'll agree with me, than is Meghan when it comes to public relations. Like her or hate her, that girl's pretty street smart, but he's such a dummy. Anyway, he's got more to lose because this is him individually being sued. But at the end of the day, it is an organization suing him. Although realistically, this lady is the brains of the organization, but the case is Sentebale versus Harry. It's not Sophie Chandauqua versus Harry. So at the end of the day, the organization itself may have said some silly things in emails or in communications, a lot less likely than that Harry would have done, being the hothead he is. So I still come back to your question. I say definitely he has far more to lose.
Oh my goodness. I guess we're just going to have to watch this space. Is there a typical time frame when it comes to when something is filed versus when things actually start to come to fruition? Are you based on what you've experienced in the past, are you looking at a calendar going, "Oh, things might start to bubble now"?
Yes, I would expect some preliminary hearings to decide these preliminary technical questions of law in the next few months. Let me put it that way. And I would expect, what are we now? We're summer of 26. I don't think you'd get a trial before late 27.
Oh my goodness.
So
And
you're going
then
to have to be patient.
in the meantime, the build up to that, could there be leaks? Could there be saying, "Oh, Harry has deleted his text messages"?
Well, there can always be leaks. Yes. And if you're lucky, you journalists, there will be leaks.
Yeah. But
Uh,
but from an attorney's perspective, you probably hate that.
there won't be
Unless
leaks from
unless
the
you're you could so some could either party, or are they going to know better based on the foundation of this case, Harry orchestrating a media campaign? Are you going to zip it up? Because
yes.
basically, if you do leak, then you're proving her point that you have been leaking this entire time.
I tend to think there will not be leaks in this case. I tend to think the zip will be very tight in this case because the competent lawyers, I'm assuming on both sides, will say if something emerges and if it's pretty obvious it's come from our side, this is going to damage us greatly before a judge because
Mm.
this is judge, not jury. And the judge expects us to play it in the English way and play cricket properly. And it will definitely damage us if we leak. So in this particular case, I think you're going to have to be doubly patient, Kinsey. I doubt that we'll be able to talk much about it. I may be wrong, maybe something sensational will emerge earlier, but I doubt we're going to be able to talk much about this case until late 2027.
Wow. All right, Jonathan Goldberg KC, I Rest My Case podcast. You are the co-host. That's linked below in the description. So all you have to do is click on it and it'll take you there. Thank you so much for your time today. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Are you concerned for Prince Harry when it comes to discovery? Like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Jonathan, thanks so much for your expertise and time today. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kinsey.